Welcome to AP Psychology Unit 4. This unit covers social psychology, humanistic, psychodynamic, cognitive. You know what? It just covers a lot of different approaches to psychology. As is typical, this unit will be worth 15 to 25% on your AP exam. And for those who are new here, this video will simply be a clipped together video of all my AP Psychology Unit 4 topic review videos without the AP style questions at the end of each video. If you'd like to try the questions at the end of the topic videos, my Unit 4 playlist will be in the description. To support more content like this, do consider following my Instagram or, just like subscribing. Anyway, let's get into Unit 4. It's time to start talking about social psychology. This means we will learn about how people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are influenced by others. The key thing at the center of this approach to psychology is the attribution theory. This simply means how we explain behavior. An attribution is simply the explanation we give for why someone behaves a certain way. Let's say, first you're a guy, and you just totally bombed a confession in front of a cute girl. The two basic attributions you could use to explain your failure of behavior are dispositional attribution, meaning you blame an internal cause such as your personal traits, and situational attribution, meaning you blame an external cause like the situation and environment. But those attributions are just single explanations in the moment. When someone tends to explain events the same way over and over, that pattern is called their explanatory style. You could have the optimistic style, meaning that even though she said no, it's only temporary and it wasn't entirely your fault. Or if you choose the pessimistic style, you could just blame yourself entirely for why she rejected you. Yeah, tough luck, buddy. Moving on, the fundamental attribution error means we as humans often blame other people's behavior on their personality while ignoring the situation that person is in. The actor-observer bias is the very funny contradiction where when we mess up, we blame the situation, but if someone else messes up, it's their fault. And finally, the self-serving bias is when we take credit for success and blame any failure on outside circumstances. Moving on, let's talk about how much control you believe you have over your life, meaning your locus of control. An internal locus of control means you believe outcomes depend mostly on your actions, while external locus of control means you believe outcomes are due to luck, fate, or outside forces. But here's a question for you. How do us as humans form opinions about people and ourselves? The answer is with quite a lot of things. Let's go ahead and talk about them. The mere exposure effect means the more we see something, the more we tend to like it. A self-fulfilling prophecy is when expectations about a person or situation lead people to act in ways that make those expectations come true. Social comparison means we judge ourselves by comparing ourselves to others. This splits into upward comparison, meaning you compare yourself to people better than you, and downward comparison, where you compare yourself to people worse off. And finally, relative deprivation means when you feel deprived because others have more, even if you're doing totally fine as is. I have a question for you all. Have you ever thought differently about a different group of people other than yourself? If you answered yes, congratulations, you're a human being. If you answered no, you're lying, admit it. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that viewing other groups of people in different ways is actually a psychologically backed phenomenon and is totally normal in humans. Now that's not me defending something like racism or sexism, I'm just saying stereotypes are very normal things all humans do. As for a definition, this will mean when you have a generalized belief about a group of people. The reason this exists is because your brain likes shortcuts and stereotypes reduce cognitive load. The issue is that stereotypes can lead to things like prejudice, meaning negative attitudes towards a group, and discrimination, meaning unfair behavior toward a group. So to put it bluntly, once again, racism equals bad. Anyway, implicit attitudes are attitudes or biases you hold without realizing it. You might honestly believe you're fair-minded, but still behave differently around certain groups without noticing. And there are a lot of ways that people manifest these implicit attitudes. Let's go over a few. The just world phenomenon is the tendency to believe the world is fair, leading people to assume that good or bad outcomes happen because individuals deserve them. In outgroup homogeneity, is that homogeneity? Let's see.
Homogeneity.
Yeah. An outgroup homogeneity bias means when you think members of other groups are all the same. Meanwhile, an in-group bias is when you naturally favor your own group over others. However, don't confuse this with ethnocentrism, because that means when you believe your culture is superior to others. Obviously, all these beliefs are flawed, and the reason why these beliefs don't change in many human minds easily is because of three big things. Belief perseverance might happen, meaning you keep believing something even after evidence proves it wrong. Confirmation bias might cause you to only look for evidence that supports what you already believe. And finally, cognitive dissonance is mental discomfort when beliefs and behavior don't match, which motivates people to either change their belief or behavior. A good example of cognitive dissonance is smoking. Lots of people can agree smoking is bad for you, yet many people still do it, meaning their behavior is different from their beliefs. Society is a strange place. Basically, the things we consider normal in society are called social norms. Following these norms because of group pressure is called conformity. The social influence theory says that social pressure can have a normative influence, meaning you conform to be liked or avoid rejection, or have an informational influence, where you conform because you think others are right. When you try to change someone's attitudes or behaviors, that is known as persuasion. And the elaboration likelihood model outlines two main routes to persuasion. You could go the central route, meaning you're persuaded by the strength/logic of an argument after deep thinking, or you could go the peripheral route, meaning you don't think deeply and only rely on cues. An example of the peripheral route might be the halo effect, where liking someone makes you assume they have other good qualities. But if you want some techniques to persuade, voila! The foot in the door phenomenon means when you ask for something small, so a bigger request is more likely to be accepted later. The door in the face phenomenon is the opposite, where you ask for a massive request, expecting for it to get rejected, so a smaller request seems more reasonable. Alright, now let's talk about research into conformity and obedience. Conformity is best illustrated with the Ash line experiment, where people gave wrong answers just to fit in, showing people follow groups even when they're wrong. Obedience, on the other hand, showed people often obey authority figures, even when asked to do things that they feel are wrong. And, oh my goodness, that is a lot more terms I have to cover. I'm gonna apologize right now because I need to go real fast through these. Individualism means when you prioritize personal goals over group goals. On the other hand, collectivism is prioritizing group goals over personal goals. And multiculturalism is when multiple cultures are supported within one society. If you are a member of a group, some phenomena you might see are group polarization, meaning when group discussion makes opinions more extreme. Groupthink is when the desire for agreement leads to poor decisions. Diffusion of responsibility is when people feel less responsible to act in groups. Social loafing is putting in less effort when working in a group. De-individuation is losing self-awareness in groups and acting impulsively. Social facilitation is performing better on easy tasks, but worse on hard tasks in the presence of others. The false consensus effect is overestimating how much others agree with you. Superordinate goals are goals requiring rival groups to cooperate. And finally, social traps are situations where individual gain leads to group harm. Oh my god, dang it, there's more. Industrial organizational psychology studies behavior and productivity in workplaces. Burnout is exhaustion caused by prolonged job stress. And finally, pro-social behavior. This means actions meant to help others. Altruism is helping without expecting rewards. The social reciprocity norm is helping those who helped you. The social responsibility norm is helping those who need help. And finally, the bystander effect is when people are less likely to help when others are present. And oh my god, we're done. So remember back to my first psychology video on this channel, where I explained there were a lot of different approaches to psychology? Well, we've already covered quite a lot of those approaches throughout this course. For this video, I want to talk about the psychodynamic and humanistic approach. For the psychodynamic approach, I introduce you to a man that looks the same in literally every picture taken of him, Sigmund Freud. The big idea to this approach of psychology is that personality is driven by unconscious processes, meaning a lot of what motivates behavior comes from thoughts, fears, memories, and desires you aren't even aware of. Basically, when someone experiences anxiety or emotional stress, defense mechanisms kick in. Defense mechanisms are unconscious strategies your mind uses to protect you from anxiety or emotional pain. And I promise you, every single one of these you have done at one point. Let's go through them. Denial is refusing to accept reality. Displacement is taking anger out on a safer target. Projection is putting your own unwanted feelings on someone else. Rationalization is making excuses to justify behavior. Reaction formation is when you act opposite to your true feelings. Regression is reverting to childish behavior under stress. Repression is pushing painful memories out of awareness. And finally, sublimation is when you turn unacceptable urges into productive actions. Another thing psychodynamic psychologists do is give tests. Now, I'm no Freud, but I'm gonna give you a test right now. Tell me, what do you see on the screen? You could have said a bat, or two animals kissing, or maybe you thought of something else. It really doesn't matter though, because this is just a blot of ink on paper. It's the same with this image, or this one, or this one. All of the images are just blots of ink on a paper. However, your unconscious mind is attributing some meaning to it that will be different for each person. This is known as the, holy crap, I'm not pronouncing that name, inkblot test. Moving on, let's talk about some humanistic things. Before I start, I want to mention you do not need to know Maslow's hierarchy of needs for your exam. The idea of this approach to psychology is that humans are naturally motivated to grow and become their best selves. However, people need acceptance and love without conditions to develop healthy personalities. If love is conditional, people develop insecurity or low self-worth. When someone grows into their best fulfilled self, they reach something known as self-actualization. Humanistic psychologists believe people naturally have a self-actualizing tendency, pushing them toward growth. Remember that Bandura guy from all the way back in Unit 3? No? Well, that's awkward. Anyway, alongside his social learning theory, Bandura also champions something known as the social cognitive theory. This basically says personality is shaped by interaction between you, your behavior, and your environment. That interaction is called reciprocal determinism. Reciprocal determinism explains how personality forms, and self-concept is one major component. This means how you view yourself. This splits into self-efficacy, meaning your belief in whether you'll succeed at a task, and self-esteem, meaning how much you value yourself overall. Moving on, the trait theory explains that personality is made of stable characteristics that stay consistent. Obviously, these characteristics are known as traits. And the Big Five theory of personality proposes that personality is made up of 5 big traits. For this, I recommend using the acronym OCEAN. The traits are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. We'll go over each of them and then we'll be done with this topic. Openness means you're creative, curious, and open to new experiences. Conscientiousness means you're organized, disciplined, and responsible. Extroversion means you're outgoing, social, and energetic. Agreeableness means you're kind, cooperative, and trusting. And finally, neuroticism, which is sometimes called emotional stability reversed, means you're anxious, moody, or emotionally unstable. Typically, these traits would be measured by specialized personality inventories that use factor analysis to organize item responses. However, if you're curious which of these personality traits you tend to lean toward, there are actual Big Five tests online you can actually do to figure that out. Not sponsored, by the way. Motivation is something a lot of people struggle with. The study of motivation is rather large, which is why this video is going to cover 6 different theories on motivation that all hold important truths. Let's start off pretty simple. Clark Hull's drive reduction theory explains that humans are motivated to act in order to reduce internal tension caused by unmet biological needs such as hunger, thirst, or pain. The other part to this, though, is arousal. That's where the arousal theory illustrated by the Yerkes-Dodson model comes in. For this, I want you to look at this upside down U graph. Basically, what it's saying is that if you have a low level of arousal, you're going to be bored, so you're going to have a poor performance. However, if you have a high level of arousal, you might get anxious, which will also cause a poor performance. This means the optimal level of arousal is somewhere in the middle, so you can perform the best. Moving on, the self-determination theory explains that motivation is based on one of 2 things: intrinsic motivation, which is doing something because you enjoy it, and extrinsic motivation, which is doing something for a reward or to avoid punishment. A big part of the extrinsic motivation might be the incentive theory, which explains that we as humans are pulled toward behavior often because of incentives. But what about non-humans like animals? This is where you rely on the instinct theory, which basically says animals are driven by instincts, which are automatic fixed behavior patterns. Going back over to humans, the sensation-seeking theory explains some people are motivated by novelty and stimulation. Examples of this might be experience-seeking, thrill/adventure-seeking, disinhibition, which is acting on impulse, and boredom susceptibility. However, all of this motivation does come with its conflict, and that's where Kurt Lewin's motivational conflicts theory comes in. This basically proposes that there are 3 main types of psychological motivational conflict someone will encounter while decision-making. The first is approach, where you decide between 2 or more desirable options. The second is avoidance-avoidance, where you decide between 2 or more undesirable options. And the third is approach-avoidance, where one option will have both good and bad parts of it. And that's all the theories. Now we have 2 more things left to talk about. Let's start with eating. Eating is a combination of motivation and biological factors. I mean, if you remember back to Unit 1, the hormones ghrelin and leptin focus on appetite and fullness, which are regulated by the hypothalamus through the pituitary gland, but you also have to understand eating is influenced by a lot of other things. But the final thing here is belongingness, because humans are naturally motivated to belong. Even if you don't want to admit it, we all want to be accepted and have some version of social connection, and that's why things like relationships and friendships will form. Emotion is very complicated. The reason I say that is because emotion is not just one thing, but a combination of 3 things: your physiological or body reaction, your cognitive reaction, and your behavioral reaction. Emotion is different from reasoning. It's faster, automatic, and often triggered by both internal and external factors. And the thing is, a lot of what makes up emotion is unique for many people, which is why a lot of theories I'm about to discuss have mixed results in their research. So just keep that in mind. First of all, what exactly is the order of an emotional reaction. Like, for example, say I see a bear in the woods and I get scared. Is it my body that reacts first or my mind? Early theories into this suggest that it is the body that reacts first and then the mind. But then other people argued that both reactions happened at the same time, and then a third argument arose that you first feel physiological or body arousal, then you label it based on context, then that label becomes emotion. But if you were wondering what the answer is and which truly does come first, what I'll say is that this is one of the most debated things across the entire study of psychology. There isn't going to be one single answer, just know that there are quite a lot of theories. So now let's talk about positive versus negative emotions. The facial feedback hypothesis suggests that your facial expressions influence your emotional experience. Like, for example, smiling might make you happier. This would support the body before the mind part of the debate, but again, research is mixed on this. But if you want things where research isn't mixed, let's look at the broaden-and-build theory. This says positive emotions broaden thinking, increase creativity, and encourage exploration, whereas negative emotions narrow focus or prepare you for specific survival responses. Moving back over to mixed research results, there is also the universality of emotion. This means certain emotions appear across cultures. Those universal emotions are anger, disgust, sadness, happiness, surprise, and fear. Another thing about culture that is mostly universal is display rules. Though certain types of rules will vary across cultures, in general, display rules are cultural norms that tell you when it's appropriate to show emotion, how strongly to show it, and whether to suppress it. And you know what my culture's display rule is making me do right now? It is making me suppress the urge to cry because this unit is all over. Alright, non-educational channel and video on the screen now. Only one more unit to go now. Are y'all excited? Ooh, or maybe you're frightened. I don't know. Why am I even talking here? I need to go off and learn calculus or something.